a lot of my childhood continued on that path. I was getting physical therapy by the time I was 5. I had a significant arthritic deterioration in my left hip and lower back with worsening pain in my ankles.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Pain Check. I'm so excited to have Kent joining me today. Hi Kent, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your education, your hobbies, your career, what you've been up to recently.
Sure. So, thanks for having me, Natasha. My name is Kent Messner. I'm a process management professional with a BA in broadcast journalism and an MBA in technology and e-commerce. I'm also a um, long-suffering Philadelphia sports fan, and I'm an aspiring novelist. And I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at 3 years old. So that's the Cliff Notes version.
Yes, and you're on this podcast because of this diagnosis. You've lived life without knowing what life was like without arthritis. So you've lived all your life with arthritis, which is pretty interesting. And I guess we can start off to the beginning years. Obviously, you're very young, and I'm assuming your parents or guardian told you the story. What did your family think was happening, and like, why did you go to see the doctor?
Yeah, so I mean, it took a while to kind of untangle things, right? And it's interesting. I mean, I was originally diagnosed with JRA, right? So juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And even now, my current rheumatologist, will say it's really JIA with a potential, Sjogren syndrome symptoms, but she's also quick to say that we shouldn't get hung up on labels and just kind of focus on the chronic pain and fatigue of my condition. And that kind of was the theme of a lot of my childhood. Like whatever you call it, I had, achiness, a lot of the classic arthritis symptoms. So when I was diagnosed with JRA at 3 years old, I was in and out of the hospital with a lot of fevers and labored breathing and severe pain and stiffness and swelling in my arms and my hands and my fingers. And at one point, things got so bad that actually a cardiologist was called in because it looked like I'd need to have fluid drained from my pericardium because the congestive heart failure was threatening to put me into critical condition. And the story that my parents tell about sort of the evolution of that diagnosis is that, he ended up sitting up with me all night. He was trying to avoid doing that draining because he didn't want to have the scar tissue complications that would produce. Fortunately, my body eventually rejected all of that fluid buildup and the pressure relief from the pericardium helped reduce the enlargement of my heart and my spleen and my liver and all the rest of that stuff that was really driving a lot of my symptoms. And I was finally able to be discharged home a couple weeks later. And all of those diagnostic tests throughout that whole thing, eventually led to the JRA diagnosis.
Wow, so that's a lot, especially because you were so young too.
Yeah.
Toddler, not even. And so, in terms of like how your parents felt, did they tell you anything about how they were feeling? Like, I guess you can imagine how they felt, but what was it kind of going on in their minds while this whole thing was happening? Like, had they heard about arthritis before in children? What was that about?
It was hard because everyone was sort of learning on the fly, me and my parents. And obviously the you know information gets better every year, every generation. So we didn't have as many research resources available back then as we do now. So everything was just sort of learning as you go based on the most recent episode. So a month after I was discharged from that episode I mentioned before with the pericardium, I was readmitted the following month with pneumonia symptoms, and I had severe arthritic attacks that gave me a recurring fever of 104 degrees or higher. I was in an oxygen tent for most of the next month until I eventually got stabilized and discharged enough with like 6 prednisone tablets per day as my my discharge script. And so just reacting to all of those things was just sort of the bouncing around that I think we all collectively did as a household. My whole childhood sort of a lot of my childhood continued on that path. I was getting physical therapy by the time I was 5. I had a significant arthritic deterioration in my left hip and lower back with worsening pain in my ankles and a limp that was that ultimately required crutches. So a lot of this was just my parents trying to react in the moment to what I needed and what the best recommendation was from the from my rheumatologist and really any other consulting physician, because I was just one of those kids that as soon as I hit the doctor's office, a flock of attendings and residents and interns and everything else would kind of come in the room. So it was really just constantly adjusting to what's he showing, why gold salt shots, what the heck are gold salt shots, we never heard of that before, right? It just all of this stuff that didn't really have any collective experience with, but you're just learning on the fly to try to alleviate the symptoms and hoping there's nothing too bad as a domino effect down the road.
And then at that time, were there the same types of medications that are available now? I'm assuming not.
Yeah, there's been a big change. So a lot of my medication, I had a heavy doses of prednisone. Gold salt shots were the norm for several years, which was I had never, or my parents had never heard of before, but they I don't know to what degree they're still commonly used, but they were commonly used at the time to try to tamp down the immune system and reduce long-term joint damage. Very, very painful. But it was a combination of those sorts of things, bufferin, lots and lots of bufferin, and then some other trial and error things with anti-inflammatories that maybe didn't stick because I had stomach reactions or something like that. But I was I was kind of that was just sort of the drill, in and out of hospitals, on and off bed rest. I started using crutches when I was 5, and really that was the norm throughout a lot of my grade school existence. Up to 8th grade, and then things kind of got even more complicated.
Oh no, because I was gonna ask, like, how have your symptoms changed over time? Like, obviously, when you were diagnosed as a young child versus now, has it gotten better, worse? What was that looking like? Because you've been through like elementary, high school, probably university, college, and now like the workplace, and you've seen everything in life with arthritis. So, in terms of symptoms, how did it change or evolve? And then medications too.
The symptoms were, I guess you'd say, predictably unpredictable to some to some degree when I was um, growing up. I mean, I always had to kind of self manage and self pace, what I was doing. I couldn't run around, rip and run like normal kids did. I had to be very cognizant of, oh, I feel this little twinge, this little ache and pain. If I don't dial it back and sit down, this is going to be really bad for me. Like, and every it felt like every spring like clockwork. It was probably even more frequent than that, but every spring like clockwork, when the weather really started to change, I just got hammered with a flare up. And I was bedridden, and everything was, multiple joints were hot and swollen and red, and it was just really tough, lots of fevers. And so that was just the kind of the norm, and it continued like that throughout grade school. Then it got worse when I got towards the end of junior high school and into high school, and then eventually it kind of stabilized and got better. But it was it was a tough grind.
It seems like it. And during schooling, did you get any accommodations and what did that look like based off of what joints were impacted?
I didn't really get accommodations until I got into high school. Like high school was the high school was kind of where a lot of things sort of collapsed on themselves, because I was so I had an attack that was so bad that I actually had to go into a a physical and occupational rehab center, off and on for the first couple years of high school. And so the accommodations that I got in high school to deal with that, because at that point crutches weren't enough. I was in a wheelchair, and so they had to move my classes around because um, I was in the high school that I attended. The building, it was an older building that was 2 floors, but there wasn't an elevator, right? So those classes that I would otherwise have been put in if I had no issues, it had to be relocated, right? And so that was a logistical issue, and not all the teachers were crazy about it. But I did get, I did get some accommodations to help me sort of move from class to class a little bit more easily, give me a little bit extra time to do that. And so that was nice. But the accommodations really weren't too far over the top.
What are the specific joints that are impacted for you? Because I know you did lots of testing before that was kind of everywhere, but do you have certain like pain in certain areas of your body?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's literally a head to toes sort of sort of deal. It's the ankles, it's the knees, it's the hips, it's the
Yeah.
fingers, it's the neck, it's the shoulders, it's just a lot of different things. But it's funny because different things bother you at different times, right? You're
For
impacted.
sure.
It's not everything all at once. It's just like this slow cascade of things. And so, um, I went a long time without, for example, my ankles bothering me, right? And now, my ankles are a big deal. I went a long time without my hands and fingers bothering me, and now they're a big deal, right? So it's kind of a weird how all of this evolves. I think initially when I was a kid, like I said, literally just about every major joint in my body had, major pain, stiffness, swelling, redness, you name it. It seemed like a lot of it, the intensity was focused first in the hips, and then it sort of branched off from there. I did have a lot of pain in my hands when I was young, pains in the knees and ankles, but the hips were really kind of the first line of fire, so to speak.
Okay, that's good to know. But yeah, I feel like I've talked to so many patients with arthritis, and they've mentioned that it's a whole body situation, so they can't really
Yeah.
say one joint or the other. But for me, it's like my wrists and my fingers and my ankle and my feet. But yeah, it's interesting to hear that for you, it's kind of like the whole body. Do you think that you've made any sort of like lifestyle changes or anything on top of your medications? Have you seen like a PT, OT? Did that ever work for you? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, some of the things that you experience along the journey, it's just sort of point in time things, but some of it stays with you, right? And you adapt and adopt it into regular routines. And one of the things that I think I started PT when I was 5 years old, right? And I don't really remember a whole lot about that experience, but when I was halfway through eighth grade, I got hammered with this really bad arthritic attack, and that put me in the rehab center that I was talking about. And I got very prescriptive physical therapy and occupational therapy in that rehabilitation center. And a lot of those routines, a lot of that passive and active range of motion, regimen, a lot of that I just adopted and stayed with me, and I still do it on a regular basis. So, it's sort of part of the journey is training yourself how to recognize symptoms within your body and things that need to be stretched, weight that needs to be taken off, things that you can push a little bit, like how to understand and how to interpret those signs. And for me, taking those PT routines and doing them, usually when I do them, it's first thing in the morning when I wake up because that's when I'm the stiffest. Not always, but incorporating that into my regular daily routine is something that's been really helpful.
That's awesome to hear because I find that it's really hard as patients to kind of keep up with the exercises that the PT gives you. Especially for me, I've struggled and I feel like I
Yeah.
felt like I was not motivated to do it, so I just stopped doing it and stopped going to the PT.
Yep.
But you really need some sort of like motivation to continue doing it because you know it'll make you feel better. But it's been a journey for me too. I find myself saying, I want to go to the PT, I go to the PT, and then I'm like, oh, I don't have time to do this. I have too much
Yep.
schoolwork. Always coming up with some excuses, which is not great. But I just like the reality of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you have to find ways to make it easy for yourself, and that's sometimes easier said than done, because a lot of my range of motion stuff are things when I'm laying in bed, right? And so if I carve out enough time for myself at the beginning of the day, it's a relatively easy thing for me to just roll over and start doing, my arm twist and my leg twist and things like that. But having those things be easy, be quick, you know, really helps you have any shot at maintaining them. Because if it's not easy and quick, then you're almost defeating yourself from the start.
That is so true. I feel like convenience is so important, and also we have so many other things going on, and so something that's like easy, convenient, and just like simple to do
Yeah.
makes things so much better. If you're telling me to do like so many other steps or so many other things, I'm probably not going to do it. So
Yep.
being on medications all your life is definitely challenging. So what medications are you on today?
Today, I am just getting by with Celebrex and Tylenol, extra strength Tylenol,
Okay.
and it's I'm mm, it's one of those kind of keeping the long game sort of thing in front of you, because I'm sort of making things a little harder on myself than I need to, because technically you're from a prescribing standpoint, right? You're told that up to 400 milligrams a day of Celebrex, you're probably okay, right? Up to 3,000 milligrams a day of acetaminophen, you're probably okay, right? But I this isn't like a temporary thing, right? This is a lifestyle for me. And what I've also read and heard is that you take NSAIDs over an extended period of time, and you're increasing your chance of, you know, kidney complications, liver complications. Like there's a lot of stuff, right, that can build up over time that makes the journey a lot tougher. And I can handle my thought process is I can handle joint pain a lot better than I can handle kidney or liver issues. So instead of taking two Celebrex a day, two 200 milligram Celebrex, I almost always try to get by with one, right? Unless I have just a really active day. Instead of taking six 500 milligram extra strength Tylenol a day, I almost always try to get by with four, unless I have a really active, heavy day, lots of steps, and then maybe I'll pop a fifth one. But I always try to bet the under, even if it means a little bit more near term discomfort, because I live for those good results that I so far, knock on wood, I gotta keep getting with my blood work with my rheumatologist, right? I don't want some of those some of those levels to move in the wrong direction. So I purposely put a little bit extra burden on myself in the short term to try to game that out in my favor in the long term.
And then you mentioned you were on prednisone for a while too. So,
Yeah.
did you have any severe side effects that really impacted your body or self-esteem, or any medications that kind of impacted that? Because I know for a lot of people,
Yeah.
they do have like bloating and
Yeah.
like puffiness of their face. So, what was that like for you?
That was hard. I mean, I was on prednisone for many years, and sometimes it was a low dose, sometimes it was an insanely high dose because of just spikes in my inflammation. But um, yeah, I had the bloating, some of the joint development, the prednisone didn't exactly help me out in terms of, it masked pain, but some of the joint development was not necessarily aided. by some of the high levels of prednisone I was taking for so long. But the self-esteem thing was always a big deal, right? My self-esteem was always kind of a little more fragile than I let on. I always hated pictures of myself because I looked so bloated and puffy. You know, but I think that when you're when you're in this sort of life, right, you can't beat yourself up over everything because there are so many things that you can beat yourself up over. So you gotta try to find wins where you can get them. And so, even though I had that puffiness and I hated the pictures and I didn't really want to see them. There were other things that I chose to kind of focus on. Like I had um, for a while when I was small, when I was first entering grade school, I had to wear these metal leg braces. Actually, it might have been even before grade school. But I wore these metal leg braces that would poke holes through the knees of my pants, and they would chafe my thighs, and they were connected to these really ugly brown shoes. And then one day, it was clinically determined that I didn't need these braces anymore and I could wear normal sneakers. And that was like one of the happiest days of my life to that point, because I felt a sense of normalcy. I felt like I could be at least semi cool, right? I could be I could be at least in that pack. And over time I became proficient enough with my crutches that I could swing on them, right, and do like little stupid tricks like jump over trash cans and stuff with them. And so, I used to show off, right? Do just dumb things like that. There were kids along the way that, you get bullied, and off and on. And there was this one kid that used to talk smack to me, and at one point he came to school on crutches with a broken leg. And I challenged him to a race down the hallway, and I destroyed him because even though my joints were weak, I could still put pressure on my two leg more than he could, right? And so, I started talking smack, right? I started telling my parents that I was probably one of the five fastest kids in the world on crutches, and yeah, it was probably bogus, but who cares? I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't something that could be disproven, so I hung on to it, and so finding those little wins is really important when you're a kid dealing with a chronic disease.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, like, it sucks because there are definitely people around you when you are younger that have comments because they don't understand what you're going through and they're
Yeah.
confused. And I feel like you probably didn't even understand yourself, so it's hard to make that expectation that they're gonna understand. So, were there any other like instances of like bullying, or how did you feel just like being in that environment where kids didn't understand what you were going through and made comments?
It was hard, and I didn't really, ironically, I didn't really feel it when I was little. I didn't really start to feel it until I got into junior high school. Because I was early in grade school, and even in kindergarten and pre-K. Like I was in, you know, private schools, smaller classes, greater ability to kind of, move at my own pace, and just for whatever reason, I was able to, um, I guess there was just more support in that setting. And when I got into, junior high school, like everything flipped. And I did, uh, I did get bullied. There were kids who, um, and not everyone by any stretch of the imagination, but a handful of kids, three, four, five of them, they hide my crutches, when I was looking to get up, they just discreetly take them and hide them somewhere, or you get names, that people think are funny and aren't really funny. But it was, it was tough, and it was tough because for a variety of reasons. But I was entering a school district that um, the kids had all been together. They had all grown up together. They were all from the same neighborhood, and so there was a familiarity there that I didn't have the benefit of, and so that made me a target as well.
That is so difficult and that sucks. And I'm so sorry. I, it's crazy how they just took your crutches and like hit them. But I
Yeah,
think kids are just silly and immature and don't
yeah,
think about what
yeah,
they're doing, which
yeah.
is really rough. And so from that, I guess I'm wondering, because you've had those experiences, did that change sort of in like university and college?
Junior high was not fun for me socially. It was just tough all around. But then when I got really sick and had to go into that rehab center and was in the wheelchair, something kind of changed in the dynamic from when I went to junior high school into high school. And I think part of it was that, the eighth graders or the sixth, seventh, eighth graders who were picking on me were suddenly the small fish in a big pond, right? They were the kids getting picked on by sometimes, so they didn't feel as bold. Maybe part of it was that, hey, it's maybe not as fun to pick on a kid in a wheelchair as it is, hiding a kid's crutches. But it there was a dynamic that did change, and the nature of the relationships that I had in the school changed, right? I mean, high school is awkward, I think, for a lot of people. Um, but it some of that awkwardness I made work to my advantage. Um, you mentioned the accommodations before. One of the accommodations I did get was, teachers in high school would let me out of class 5 minutes early, right? Let's not let the kid in the wheelchair, the kid with the crutches, get run over in the hallway. Let's let him get out 5 minutes early so he could get to his next class on time. Um, Curiously, there were volunteers among my classmates who would like to help me, to my next class because, what kid doesn't want to get out of class 5 minutes early, right?
Yeah.
So I so I went from sort of being this outcast to being a guy that people were suddenly offering to help that had never offered to help before. And look, full disclosure, I'm a teenage boy. I picked, the cutest girl that was volunteering to help. And, and so, you know, I would, have these minutes where I could just talk, right? And we could just hang, and there was no one else around. The hallways were empty. And sometimes that facilitated a relationship. You start talking, then you're calling people on the phone and having these really interesting conversations. And it was a different sort of experience than I ever would have had otherwise in high school, because in high school a lot of kids are just running around being crazy, right? I didn't have that luxury. I was homebound, oftentimes bedbound, but here I was, even with limited numbers of friends, having more deep and meaningful interactions, I think, in conversations with the friends that I did have, just because my arthritis forced me into slowing down, right? It forced me to hit the brake pedal and be more observant, and be more thoughtful, and be more conversational. I think that I otherwise would have. And so the quality of my illness aside, chronic condition aside, the quality of my high school experience really started to change then.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, students tend to use other students to get what they want. And
Yep.
I mean, it's sad because it's like they genuinely probably maybe had something else in their mind before they wanted to help. But I'm glad that that also led you to have conversations with people. And I feel like once you are heard, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
Whereas if no one even gives you a chance, then nothing really happens and it's not a conversation and you don't get to talk to people.
Hmm. Yep.
So you mentioned that, all these experiences happen and you did end up having, I guess, some good people come into your life. How did your friends at certain parts of your life react to when you told them you had arthritis?
Um, it's one of those things that's hard to it's hard to appreciate unless you live with it, and even when you live with it, if you don't actually experience it yourself, um it's hard to understand. I mean, everyone could see, right? The visual cues were there, me being in a wheelchair, me, later on, going back to crutches, it was easy to see that I struggled doing certain things, right? um but what I think has always mystified, um, friends, family, whoever, right? Anyone in my life that interacts with me socially is that, the nature of arthritis is that you can have good and bad days, right? You can have days where, it's not much of a hindrance at all, and then you can have days where, oh my God, I it's killing me to even stand up, right? And sometimes the switch can flip quickly, and it's hard for people who don't understand that journey to understand how that happens. Um, so I think that there was sympathy, there was a certain amount of empathy, but it was hard for them to connect the dots and understand exactly why, I was able to do this on a good day, but not that on a bad day.
I see what you mean. And you don't really expect them to understand, although you would like
Yeah,
them to. So it's really as much as
yeah,
you can get them to somewhat understand is the best you can do. I think even
yeah,
for me looking back at high school, it was more about me communicating what I needed and what I couldn't do and could do, and then they would just kind of adapt things to that. Whether they
yeah.
understood it or not, they kind of just adapted to what I was comfortable with. So it's always nice to find people like that, and I'm glad that you were able to find people like that in your life.
Yeah, and it's, when I was younger, when I was early in grade school, I had a nice circle of friends who they would modify the rules of games like kickball or baseball so that I could participate. I wasn't gonna run around the bases like them. I wasn't gonna, kick like them, but they were really cool about, modifying rules like that for me to participate. The rules of modification get different as you're older, right? Because when you're in high school, um, a lot of kids are looking for whatever element of freedom they can get, right? So if you're slowing them down, the amount of accommodation sometimes dissipates a little bit.
For sure. So you mentioned something about a wheelchair and then also crutches. So can you talk a little bit about the mobility aids that you use in your daily life? How has that changed over time?
Yeah, so I was on crutches from the time I was 5 until um, I was in ninth grade, and once I landed in the physical and occupational rehabilitation center, then I was more wheelchair dependent because I couldn't stand up. I couldn't really put any weight bearing activities at all on my joints. I couldn't. There was a lot of things I just couldn't do. So I was wheelchair bound for most of those next 2 years, and I was in and out of the rehab center. And then I got discharged for good, like around the middle of my sophomore year of high school. And over that next year, then I started to the inflammation started to subside. The redness wasn't as frequent, the pain, the fevers, all of that. And so I got to the point where I was strong enough to then move back to crutches. So it was crutches to wheelchair back to crutches. And I was on crutches probably from the time I was um, sort of 11th grade, middle of 11th grade or so, really until I was in the middle of my sophomore year of college. Graduated high school, got admitted to college, was living on campus, and I was tooling around campus on my crutches, and I thought I was doing pretty good. I was doing really well. I felt really strong, and I just, as an intellectual experiment, in the middle of my sophomore year of college, I just tossed my crutches in the corner of my dorm room and said, let's see how long I can go without these things, right? And it's a big campus. You got concrete everywhere. You're going uphill, downhill. I thought it would be like 3 weeks and I'd be beaten up enough to go back in the crutches. I didn't touch my crutches again for over a decade, and it was really kind of an unbelievable thing because I didn't I was led to believe when I was growing up that yes, remission is possible, but I had been laid I'd been laid out so low, right, so flat for so long with this illness that it was kind of a pipe dream. Like it was a Hail Mary. If it happens, that's great, but don't count on it. And it seemed like remission was right there, right? I was, I still had a limp that I was walking around with, but I was able to. My 20s were fantastic. Like just, I was unencumbered. I didn't have a wheelchair. I didn't have crutches. I didn't have anything holding me back, and it was fantastic. And then, a little over a decade later, I started to have really bad lower back pain, like excruciating lower back pain. And it was actually referred pain from my hips because I just didn't have anything left in my hips. Everything was shot. And so I had to get bilateral hip replacement surgery. And so, you're going through that, you're spending a few months, you know, I was on disability for a few months, for about 3.5 months with that. And then there's, an additional 3 or 4 months that I'm kind of getting myself weaned off of crutches, and I'm back, right? I was laid out, I was on crutches, and now I'm back. I don't have any crutches anymore. Everything's cool. And then all of a sudden, like other things start to go wrong. I'd gone like 10 or 12 years without any issues after the hip replacement surgery, and my rheumatologist kept saying, "What about your ankles? What about your ankles?" I said, "What about my ankles? They haven't bothered me in forever. Who cares?" Well, apparently my ankles care because about a decade ago, my ankles just decided to abandon me and see ya, going into business for myself. So I started to get like a lot of pain and swelling and just lack of cartilage. Right, it is really what it boils down to. And so I was able to kind of suck it up and stitch things together with wrap around ACE support bandages and cortisone shots, but eventually that just wasn't cutting it. And so I had to go and start using a cane. And and then after a while, I still use the cane when I'm in and out of the office, but when I'm at home, I'm up and down the stairs a lot because we have a two floor house with a basement. So I'm up and downstairs a lot. So I'm back to crutches, right, at home. And that's been the norm for the last several years. Crutches when I'm at home and the cane when I'm at work. And probably at some point I'm just gonna need crutches for everything, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
You're on crutches all your life. Like, is there any way that there's an alternative to like help whatever's happening in your ankles, or is it like there's damage or erosion in your ankles? Like, what is it like?
There's damage, there's erosion. I mean, we've talked about injectables. She's where you have the plasm that gets injected that kind of acts as a buffer,
Mhm.
where cartilage used to be. She's historically been kind of skeptical about the efficacy of some of those injections because you never quite know what's in those platelets, right? It's kind of a little bit of a gamble. And so, the discussions I've had with her is, hey, keep doing what you're doing until a more sustainable solution comes along. And I think at some point, um, I just have an aversion to the idea of ankle fusion surgery. Like I just don't want my ankles to be fused in one position. It does not appeal to me. There is this thing called the STAR total ankle replacement procedure that I think at some point I'm probably going to I'm probably gonna have to get. I've been trying to run out the clock here to see if more and more health systems start to provide it. it becomes more and more, the research, has better and better efficacy behind it. But that kind of at the moment seems to be the way I'm leaning as a long-term solution. Until then,
Mhm.
just kind of bandage bandage it together and with string and chewing gum and do the best you can.
And are there some challenges when it comes to using crutches like all your life, all the time? I feel like it does seem kind of hard. Like, doesn't other parts of your body hurt? I can just imagine, like, or are you used to it? How does it work?
Well, yes and no. I mean, you do get discomfort under your arms, periodically that you have to take care of. It does create some stress in your shoulders. It probably like broadens your chest plate a a little bit just because of all the stress of the pushing back and forth. Um, but it's something that's natural to me now. I know a lot of people hate it. It's uncomfortable. It's unnatural, but it's kind of like breathing to me now. So it's not that big a deal. So in some ways, if I need an assist, it's as comfortable an assist as I am probably going to realistically get, at least as a quick fix.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. I feel like whatever is working for the patient is so important because you've
Yeah.
definitely probably have also tried so many things. And if this is what's going to work for you, then I think it's important to like obviously prioritize what your preferences and values are. Because I find like oftentimes that patients, it's hard for them to make decisions on what they want in terms of their healthcare. And so if there's something that you've obviously consulted your rheumatologist about it, and so I think that's really an important point to emphasize here is that you're talking to your doctor, you see your preferences, and this is what is going to help you. So I'm glad to hear that it's working out. You also briefly mentioned a rehab center. So can you talk a little bit about what that point of your life was and why did you have to go to one?
I had to go to one because basically I just needed, 24/7 care and I needed to be closely monitored for flare-ups and it was just there was a specific um, physical and occupational rehab center that was associated with one of the hospitals that my rheumatologist was affiliated with that I was referred to and it was a different experience, right? Because it was a center that really specialized in younger patients. I don't know exactly, but I think um, the inpatient, all inpatients, and it was basically like from elementary school age up till I'll say late teens, early 20s. But it wasn't, and it was, we're talking dozens of kids, not hundreds. So it wasn't a huge sprawling facility. It was kind of a smaller facility, kind of tucked into like a little rural landscape. But it wasn't just for kids with arthritis or chronic pain flare-ups. I mean, there were kids with all kinds of things going on. I mean, there were amputees, there were kids with spina bifida, there were kids with halos and neurological disorders. Um, some of them had no motor skills, right? And not only did they have no motor skills, they also had no speech processing capabilities, right? And they could only audibly communicate through grunts and groans. And your private rooms were at a premium. And so a lot of us were kind of sharing the same space to various degrees, which, it kind of made things hard at times. And I remember it took me several months to finally get assigned my own private room because I was in a shared space with a lot of other kids when I first got there. And when I got my own room, right, there was this kid outside in the ward that was a shared bed space, and um, almost every night after the lights were turned out, he just started loudly moaning and groaning, and it would just last through the whole night. A kid who just neurologically just had a lot of obstacles and was really struggling, and that was the nighttime ritual, right? He just moaned and groaned loudly the whole night, and then he'd be quiet during the day. And, it was almost like he'd worn himself out. And then the next thing, it'd start again, all over again, the next night. And that was the routine over and over for months. And so that kind of stuff stays with you, and it affects the way you interact with the world around you, Um, it was just a very tough sort of different environment where you have to be really good at compartmentalizing things and really good at self-care, mentally and emotionally. And it's one of those experiences that and ended up helping me manage my condition, but was a very formative experience in terms of my own mental and emotional development as well.
I think also it makes you more mature as a person
Yes.
because although you experienced being in this environment, you know other people who are going through other things, and you can really empathize and like feel for them, but also you know how to interact with them, and you mature and grow up really quickly because you understand what it's like to be in similar lived experiences, although it's not the same and to the same extent. Definitely like very similar lived experiences. So, how long did you stay at this rehab center, and like when did you get sort of discharged, or when was it time for you to leave? Like, how did you know that?
So I think I was admitted at the beginning of my freshman year of high school. And then, there were a few times when I'd improve, and, my flare-ups would reduce, and my blood work looked encouraging, and things started to trend in the right direction, and they discharged me, and then I'd have a flare-up, and I'd end up back in there. So I was in and out, I think twice during my freshman year of high school, and then I was admitted again early my sophomore year of high school, and was discharged for good about midway through my sophomore year of high school. And it was all sort of a, you know, determination, educated guess on, the discharge criteria was, hey, how's your blood work looking? How many flare ups have you had in the past week? How severe have they been? What's your range of motion like? Okay, we kind of sort of think you might be able to go home now. Let's give it a shot. And sometimes that backfired, sometimes it didn't. But it was, you learn a lot about yourself, right? Um in that sort of environment. And the staff overall was great, right? And they worked really hard to attend to kids' needs, not just in terms of the therapy, but creating events for kids to socialize in and stuff like that. Movie nights and arts and crafts events and things like that. But I was not having it, right? I, I wasn't trying to be difficult or judgmental. Um, there were kids that that those were great outlets for them, and that's phenomenal. It's just that I felt like if I participated in those kinds of activities, and that would further normalize the situation that I was in. And I wasn't having that. Like in my mind, even though I'd been in and out of this rehab center for 2 years now, freshman and sophomore years of high school, um, this wasn't my normal, right? I continued to treat this like it was a flare up. Granted, it was an incredibly long, horribly painful flare up that had cost me the ability to walk on several different occasions, but still, mentally, emotionally, to me, I was contextualizing it as it's just a flare up, right? And I'd gotten over flare ups before, and somehow I was going to do it again. And so I opted out a lot of these, built in sort of social events. And what didn't occur to me was how the way I was processing things like that sometimes got misinterpreted by others. I was so busy wrapping myself in my own cocoon of resiliency and motivation that I was really, honestly, I was unprepared when a social worker at the rehab center asked me if I was having thoughts of self-harm or suicide. I, I, I was stunned. Like that was the furthest thing from my mind, right? In my mind, I'm not, I'm not plotting to do myself harm. I'm plotting my escape. Right? I mean, not from existence, but certainly from this rehabilitation center. But in her clinical, the social worker in her clinical depression symptoms checklist, right? She just saw a kid who was withdrawing into himself, and that meant there was a threat potential there, right? And I get it, right? I know those can be signs that foreshadow, deeper problems with other people. But for me, I just needed space to process things my way. And that way was to step back into myself, visualize worlds outside of where I was, and try to find ways to take those teeny tiny baby steps every day that would somehow get me closer to that. And I think that I got so wrapped up in that sort of mental gymnastics rationalization that I think I sort of lost the way I presented to other people, and they misinterpreted it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to also make assumptions very quickly. And also, when it comes to living with a chronic illness, you lean towards thinking about obviously when you have these physical symptoms, you can also get mental health problems. And there's lots of kind of emotional stuff that comes with the chronic illness. So I
Yeah,
totally see how that would kind of take place in terms of like commentary, and obviously
yeah,
you're probably going through it a little bit in terms of needing that support, but really sometimes you just need to be left alone and process it.
yeah,
And I think it's hard because everyone wants to help you, and it's in the kindness of their hearts that they're like trying to look out for you and really learn about what's happening, but sometimes it's just like I need my own space because I need to process what just
yeah,
happened. So
yeah,
I wouldn't say it's their fault in any way, obviously, but it's important to know that if someone does need their space, like you do need to kind of give them their time.
yep, no, absolutely.
What was your journey kind of like in terms of living with a disability and finding your job and being in your current job?
So that, yet another sort of interesting, interesting winding road, right? So my undergrad degree was in broadcast journalism, and I wanted to the game plan at the time when I was in college was to be a sports broadcaster, right? I wanted to call Phillies games. I wanted to, announce basketball games. I wanted to be an anchor in the sports department. Like I wanted to do all that stuff. And the nature of that particular industry is that at that time was that it was really kind of consolidating, and it was really hard to find a decent paying full-time job without just becoming a nomad and sleeping on the floor of studio apartments for God knows how long. So I eventually, I had done some sports radio reporting for a local radio station nights and weekends for a while, but eventually I decided I need a better paying gig than this. So I got hired into a sales and service call center for General Electric in suburban Philadelphia, and that started me on my path because I eventually got trained there in Six Sigma process management, and so that really put me on a path towards being able to work in a variety of different industries with this framework, right, that enables you to kind of parachute in and and help kind of diagnose and unravel why things have unraveled from a business process management standpoint. And so that's been, that's been really helpful. That's been a job that has provided for my family, but it's also a job that's given me a lot of great experiences. And I think that one of the things that I'm finding in terms of how that marries up with my current physical needs is that it's a job that realistically I can do anywhere that I have a Wi-Fi signal in a laptop. Right? There are some industries, there are some organizations that were early adopters with telecommuting for corporate professionals. There were some that were kind of laggards, but I think that COVID sort of, brought a lot of people to the same table there to recognize by necessity at first, the value of telecommuting. And so that's been a huge, huge benefit for me. Being able to, do this work, manage virtual teams, run virtual meetings, and do it in a way that, I can still, cater to my daily needs. I can elevate my legs as I need to. I can have, I can position my laptop and get in, change positions comfortably as I need to throughout the day. Like it's just a very different thing, and it saves me a lot of wear and tear in terms of commuting because, like I said, my ankles are not really my friend at this point, and especially my right ankle, right? And when I first told my rheumatologist, yeah, you were right, my ankles are really starting to kill me, it was my right one that was disproportionately a lot worse, and it still is. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Your right ankle is your gas and brake pedal, right? And I habitually have been in the habit of driving 20 to 25,000 miles a year. Probably about 70% of it was work related. And so you think about the stress that puts on your ankle, you think about the stress it puts on your hands and fingers in terms of gripping the steering wheel. I mean, it all adds up. And so having the flexibility to be able to manage that a little bit more on your terms, because I live 45 miles away from the office building I'm assigned to. So it's a hike. Not only is it a loss in terms of time and productivity to go into the office all the time, but it's also wear and tear on joints that are suddenly becoming more worn and more torn over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of patients, and especially myself, I personally like hybrid format, even if it's school right now, just because I like the mix of in-person interactions, but then also
Yep.
doing things from home. And I realized over time at first when I started university, I was so excited to do morning classes, and then I was like, joint pain in the morning and morning stiffness doesn't work out. So I prefer like later the morning or afternoon. But you always I think it's so important to know what works best for you and having an online kind of opportunity for your career and you're still able to do the things that you like doing is
Yeah.
great because you were able to meet both of those and then be comfortable. You can basically accommodate yourself,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And so I think it's so important for people that are listening to just know that you can find the right balance in terms of work and where and what
Yep.
you want to do and then always finding what works best. So I know personally, like I like the whole hybrid idea, but for some people it may be all in person or just online. And knowing that those are options now, and it's great to have those options. I think especially for people with disabilities.
Yeah, and we have team meetings every week where it is beneficial, right, to be on site, to be in front of people, just to facilitate parts of a relationship that wouldn't otherwise get that kind of exposure. But just coming in for the sake of a quota when I know all I'm going to do is be on Teams or Zoom meetings with people who are themselves at different locations. We're all going to be dialing in. So does it really matter if I'm dialing in from this desk or that desk? I mean, it's nice to be able to be a little bit more flexible in how that's managed.
For sure. So I wanted to end off the podcast episode with an advice segment. So, what advice would you give to youth who are struggling to find a sense of belonging at school while living with a disability?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, from just based on my experience, I think the big thing is don't run away from being different, right? I mean, you're people are going to perceive you as different. Lean into that, right? Use it as a learning opportunity that at some point is likely to make you even more special than you already are, right? Because you may not be able to rip and run like other kids, but you can develop different skill sets that might not come to those other kids until later in life, right? Be observant, be inquisitive, build those bridges in your imagination when reality seems crazy boring because you can't go out like like you might want to. And look, kids can be very reckless and stupid, right? And I know being confined to my bed made me more conversational, more observant about the world around me, and less impulsive. And honestly, sometimes that saved me from being out with knuckleheads who are destined to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, right? So let those other kids make those mistakes, right? And lean into those quieter talents that will help you mature faster and could give you an advantage later in life when you're asked to make mature decisions about things like what you want to do for a living and how you should spend your money and which people are worth hanging out with because they help make it easier for you to be yourself instead of making you feel pressured to be something you're not.
Thank you so much, Kent, for coming on this week's podcast episode. We talked about your experience living with JRA. We started off by kind of going through your diagnosis journey, what some of your symptoms were, the affected joints, your medication journey, and the type of care you received. You discussed kind of what it was like living with this diagnosis from childhood to middle school, then high school with crutches, and some of the comments and bullying you had to go through due to your disability, into the experience of the rehab center where you were in a wheelchair and what life was like after that. We chatted a little bit about your undergraduate experiences and your current work, and we ended off the episode with some advice to youth living with disabilities. So everyone, like, comment, subscribe, share this episode, and I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Pain Check. Thank you so much, Kent. Bye. I can't hide, 'cause growing pains are keeping me up.